Phoebe's heart raced as she approached the secure facility, her delicate Jem'Hadar frame trembling with each step. She was about to meet her new pet, a human male named John Baker. The thought made her scales prickle with dread. Earth had fallen to the Jem'Hadar Empire, its once proud civilization now reduced to a conquered populace. In a bid to ensure compliance, the Empire had devised a cruel program, assigning alien overseers as owners to influential humans. Phoebe, despite her reluctance, had been chosen for this duty. She paused before the entrance, her three-fingered hand hovering over the access panel. Beyond these walls waited John Baker, a prominent human resistance leader. Phoebe had heard stories of human savagery, of their brutish nature and violent tendencies. She steeled herself, expecting to encounter a monster. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a stark corridor lined with one-way mirrors. Phoebe's elongated feet clicked against the polished floor as she approached the cell containing her charge. She peered through the transparent barrier, her violet eyes widening in surprise. John Baker stood tall and defiant, his muscular frame casting a long shadow across the sterile room. His jaw was set, eyes blazing with determination that seemed to challenge the very foundations of Jem'Hadar authority. Phoebe found herself captivated by his physical presence, so different from the grotesque creature she had imagined. As she watched, John paced the length of his cell, each movement displaying a controlled strength that spoke of both power and dignity. Phoebe's initial fear began to transform, curiosity and an unexpected attraction taking root in her mind. Unbeknownst to Phoebe, John was acutely aware of the PET program. He had formulated a daring plan to use this twisted arrangement to his advantage. If he could gather intelligence and potentially find a way to escape, it could turn the tide for the human resistance. The Jem'Hadar High Command monitored the situation closely from their orbital command center. This pairing of Phoebe and John was more than a simple assignment. It was a test case for their new strategy of control. The success or failure of this union could determine the future of human Jem'Hadar relations. Phoebe took a deep breath, her hand hovering over the cell's access panel. In moments, she would come face to face with John Baker. Both of them were poised on the precipice of a meeting that would set in motion a chain of events with far-reaching consequences. Tension simmered throughout the conquered Earth. Other members of the human resistance, unaware of John's true intentions, viewed his apparent cooperation with Phoebe as a betrayal of their cause. Whispers of dissent and plans for retaliation spread through hidden networks and secret gatherings. As Phoebe prepared to enter the cell, the air crackled with anticipation. This moment, the meeting of captor and captive, alien and human, held the potential to challenge deeply held beliefs on both sides. It was a collision of worlds, cultures, and individuals that would test the limits of understanding and potentially reshape the balance of power between humans and Jem'Hadar. With a final moment of hesitation, Phoebe activated the door. It slid open, revealing John Baker in all his imposing human glory. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the fate of two species hung in the balance. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Phoebe stepped into John Baker's cell. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and unexpected attraction coursing through her body. As she entered, John's muscles tensed, ready for confrontation, but his expression quickly shifted to one of surprise. Phoebe's iridescent scales shimmered under the harsh cell lighting, catching John off guard. He had expected a monstrous alien, but instead found himself face-to-face with a being of otherworldly beauty. Her large, expressive eyes met his, conveying a depth and complexity he hadn't anticipated in a Jem'Hadar overseer. They approached each other cautiously, the air between them crackling with tension and unspoken curiosity. John, seeing an opportunity to gather intelligence, made a split-second decision. He lowered his gaze and adopted a submissive posture, surprising Phoebe with his apparent cooperation. I'm here to explain the terms of our arrangement, Phoebe said, her voice soft but firm. As she spoke, John's eyes darted to her wrist, noticing a small device. A translator, he realized. If he could get his hands on it, it could be invaluable to the resistance. I understand, John replied, his voice carefully modulated to convey compliance. I'm ready to listen and learn. Over the next few days, John and Phoebe spent increasing amounts of time together. John maintained his facade of cooperation, slowly earning Phoebe's trust while secretly observing her routines and gathering information about Jem'Hadar technology and protocols. During a supervised exercise session in the facility's courtyard, John demonstrated his physical prowess. He moved through a series of complex calisthenics, his muscles rippling with each controlled movement. Phoebe watched, mesmerized by his strength and agility. Other Jem'Hadar guards observed as well, murmuring among themselves. As John completed his routine, he noticed a change in the way the Jem'Hadar looked at him. Their eyes held a mix of respect and calculation, and he realized his display had inadvertently increased his value in their eyes. Phoebe approached him, offering a towel. "That was impressive," she said, her scales shifting colors slightly in what John had come to recognize as a sign of admiration. "Thank you," John replied, carefully maintaining his submissive demeanor. "I hope it meets with your approval." As they walked back to his cell, John noticed Phoebe's gait had changed. She seemed more relaxed around him, her initial fear replaced by a growing curiosity. He filed this observation away, knowing it could be useful later. In the days that followed, their interactions became increasingly charged with unspoken desire. During a routine medical examination, Phoebe's hand accidentally brushed against John's as she adjusted a monitoring device. The contact sent electric shivers through both of them, leaving them flustered and confused. John's mind raced. This attraction, however unexpected, could be a powerful tool. But as he looked into Phoebe's eyes, he saw a reflection of his own conflicted emotions. The line between deception and genuine feeling was beginning to blur. Meanwhile, in another part of the facility, Lieutenant Kavanaugh watched footage of John and Phoebe's interactions with narrowed eyes. The Jem'Hadar officer's fists clenched as he observed their growing closeness. "This is unacceptable," Kavanaugh hissed to himself. "I will not let this human undermine our authority." He began formulating a plan to separate John from Phoebe and take control of the high-profile captive himself. Unaware of the jealous lieutenant's schemes, Phoebe sought out her superior, Commander Zarek. She found him in his office, poring over holographic displays of Earth's conquered territories. "Commander," Phoebe began hesitantly, "I need your guidance regarding the human, John Baker." Zarek's stern gaze fixed upon her. "Proceed, Phoebe." "I find myself conflicted. The human is not what I expected. He's intelligent, resilient. I fear I may be developing attachments." The commander's expression hardened. "Remember our goals, Phoebe. Humans are not our equals. They are a conquered species, nothing more. Do not let their appearance or behavior deceive you." Phoebe nodded, but as she left Zarek's office, her hearts were heavy with doubt. She returned to John's cell, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and duties. As the cell door opened, John looked up, his eyes meeting Phoebe's. In that moment, both felt the weight of their secrets, the tension of their growing attraction, and the looming threat of forces beyond their control. They stood on the precipice of a dangerous dance, one that would test the boundaries between human and alien, captor and captive, duty and desire. John's eyes lingered on Phoebe as she turned to leave his cell, his mind racing with possibilities. He knew he needed to push their connection further if he hoped to gather more intelligence, but the growing warmth in his chest told him this was becoming more than just a mission. Over the next few days, John carefully orchestrated his plan. During a routine training session in the facility's gymnasium, he executed a series of complex maneuvers on the weightlifting equipment. As Phoebe watched from nearby, her scales shimmering with admiration, John deliberately overextended himself on his final rep. A sharp cry of pain echoed through the gym as John clutched his shoulder, his face contorted in apparent agony. Phoebe rushed to his side, her delicate hands hovering over his injured form. "John, are you all right?" Her voice quivered with concern. John grimaced, his breath coming in short gasps. I think I've torn something. It hurts to move." Phoebe's violet eyes widened with worry. "We need to get you to the medical bay immediately." As they made their way through the facility's corridors, John leaned heavily on Phoebe, acutely aware of her body's warmth against his side. The scent of her scales, reminiscent of sun-warmed stone, filled his nostrils. The medical bay doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a sterile environment of gleaming surfaces and advanced alien technology. Phoebe helped John onto an examination table, her touch lingering longer than necessary. As the door closed behind them, leaving them alone in the room, John seized his chance. He reached out, grasping Phoebe's hand in his own. "Phoebe, I need to tell you something." Phoebe froze, her scales rippling with a mix of anticipation and fear. "What is it, John?" "I can't keep pretending anymore. These past few days, getting to know you, I've developed feelings for you. Real feelings." John's voice was low, intense, his eyes locked on hers. Phoebe's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, her hand slipping from John's grasp. "John, we can't. It's not allowed." "I know," John pressed on, his heart racing, "but I can't deny what I feel. And I think you feel it too." Phoebe's scales flushed a deep violet, her inner conflict visible in the way her body tensed and relaxed. John, Before she could finish, the medical bay door slid open with a harsh screech. Lieutenant Kavanaugh stormed in, his reptilian features twisted in a snarl of rage. "What is the meaning of this?" Kavanaugh's voice was a low, dangerous growl. His eyes darted between John and Phoebe, taking in their close proximity and flushed appearances. Phoebe straightened, her professional demeanor snapping back into place. "Lieutenant, I was just—" "Silence!" Kavanaugh cut her off. "I've been watching you, Phoebe. You've become far too attached to this human filth. I'll be reporting this to High Command immediately." John's mind raced, recognizing the danger of the situation. In a split second, he made a decision. Forcing his features into a smug grin, he turned to Kavanaugh. "Oh, come now, Lieutenant. Surely you can appreciate a good performance when you see one." John's voice dripped with false bravado. "I was merely demonstrating my ability to manipulate emotions, as per the requirements of your charming pet program." Kavanaugh's eyes narrowed, his suspicion evident. "Is that so, human?" John nodded, maintaining his act. "Of course, I understand my role here, and I'm simply playing my part. Phoebe here was merely checking on my injury, nothing more." The lieutenant's gaze shifted between them, uncertainty replacing his initial anger. After a tense moment, he grunted. "Very well, but I'll be watching you both closely. Any further incidents, and there will be severe consequences." As Kavanaugh stormed out, Phoebe released a shaky breath. She turned to John, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and something deeper, unspoken. "John, But before she could continue, the facility's intercom crackled to life. Commander Zarek's voice filled the room, his tone clipped and authoritative. "Attention all personnel. There will be a mandatory demonstration in the main hall in 1 hour. Human subject John Baker is to be prepared and brought to the staging area immediately. This is a direct order." John and Phoebe exchanged a look of apprehension, both aware that this sudden demonstration could change everything. As Phoebe helped John to his feet, their hands briefly intertwined, a silent acknowledgement of the dangerous waters they now navigated together. The trek to the main hall felt like a march to execution. John's mind raced, trying to anticipate what this demonstration might entail. As they approached the massive doors of the hall, he could hear the low murmur of a crowd beyond. Phoebe squeezed his arm gently before stepping away. "I have to join the audience," she whispered, her eyes conveying a mix of concern and something deeper. "Whatever happens, be strong." John nodded, squaring his shoulders as the doors swung open. The main hall was a cavernous space, filled with rows upon rows of Jem'Hadar officials. Their reptilian faces turned as one to stare at him, a sea of alien judgment. At the center of the hall stood Commander Zarek, his imposing figure casting a long shadow across the polished floor. "Approach, human," he commanded, his voice echoing through the chamber. John walked forward, each step measured and deliberate. He kept his eyes forward, refusing to search the crowd for Phoebe's familiar face. "You stand before us as a representative of your species," Zarek announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Today you will demonstrate the proper submission expected of all humans under Jem'Hadar rule. A cold weight settled in John's stomach as he realized what was being asked of him. This was a test, not just of his cover, but of his very humanity. He hesitated for a moment, every fiber of his being rebelling against the idea of debasing himself for the entertainment of his captors. But then, almost against his will, his eyes found Phoebe in the crowd. She stood rigid, her scales a muted shade of distress, but her gaze was steady and encouraging. In that moment, John made his choice. Taking a deep breath, he lowered himself to his knees before Commander Zarek. The hall fell silent, the tension palpable as everyone waited to see what would happen next. "I submit myself to the wisdom and power of the Jem'Hadar Empire," John declared, his voice clear and unwavering. But even as he spoke the words of submission, he infused them with a subtle undertone of strength, a hint of the unbroken spirit that still burned within him. Commander Zarek's eyes narrowed, clearly detecting the nuance in John's performance. He circled the kneeling human, his footsteps echoing in the silent hall. "Very good," Zarek murmured, almost to himself. Then louder, he addressed the crowd. "You see before you the future of human Jem'Hadar relations, compliant yet intriguing." As John remained kneeling, he became aware of a new presence approaching. A Jem'Hadar official he didn't recognize stepped forward, his ornate uniform marking him as someone of high rank. "Most impressive, Commander Zarek," the newcomer said, his gravelly voice filled with interest. "I am General Korax, and I believe this human may be of use to us in ways we had not previously considered." John's ears perked up at this, though he kept his head bowed. He could feel the weight of the general's gaze upon him, assessing and calculating. "Rise, human," General Korax commanded. As John got to his feet, he caught sight of Lieutenant Kavanaugh's face in the crowd, twisted with nearly unleashed fury. Whatever the general had in mind, it was clear not everyone would be on board. The demonstration concluded, and John found himself being led back to his cell, his mind blown from the events of the day. As he was left alone, he sank onto his bunk, exhausted but alert. He didn't have long to rest. The cell door slid open, revealing Phoebe. She stepped inside quickly, the door shutting behind her. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Then, as if drawn by an irresistible force, they moved towards each other. Their lips met in a desperate, passionate kiss. John pulled Phoebe close, feeling the smooth texture of her scales beneath his fingers. Phoebe's hands explored the unfamiliar contours of John's face and hair, her touch both curious and tender. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. The reality of their situation came crashing back, bringing with it a wave of fear and exhilaration. "John," Phoebe whispered, her voice trembling, "what are we doing? If we're caught—" Before John could respond, an alarm blared through the facility, its harsh sound shattering the moment. The lights in the cell flickered, plunging them into momentary darkness before switching to a pulsing red emergency mode. "What's happening?" John asked, his body tensing for action. Phoebe's eyes widened in panic. "It's a security breach, but that's impossible unless—" The rest of her sentence was drowned out by the sound of distant explosions. John's heart raced as he realized what was happening. The resistance had come for him, unaware that their rescue attempt could jeopardize everything he had worked for. As chaos erupted throughout the facility, John and Phoebe found themselves trapped in the cell, forced to confront the impossible choice that lay before them. The future of two species hung in the balance, and the decision they made in the next few moments would change everything. Everything. The fate of both their species hung in the balance, and their next move could determine the course of the future. Suddenly, the cell door burst open, revealing Lieutenant Kavanaugh flanked by a squad of heavily armed Jem'Hadar soldiers. Their reptilian faces twisted with fury as they leveled their weapons at John and Phoebe. "Traitors!" Kavanaugh snarled, his scales rippling with rage. In that split second, John's eyes darted around the cell, searching desperately for an escape route. His gaze fell on the thin seam of a maintenance hatch beneath his sleeping mat, previously hidden from view. Without hesitation, John grabbed Phoebe's hand and dove for the hatch. He wrenched it open with a grunt of effort, revealing a narrow, dark tunnel below. "In, now!" John urged, pushing Phoebe towards the opening. She didn't hesitate, sliding into the cramped space with surprising agility. John followed close behind, pulling the hatch shut just as plasma bolts sizzled through the air where they had been standing moments before. The maintenance tunnel was pitch black and claustrophobically tight. John could feel Phoebe's scales brushing against him as they crawled forward, their bodies pressed close in the confined space. The sound of their ragged breathing echoed off the metal walls, punctuated by distant explosions and alarms. As they navigated the twisting passageway, John knew it was time for the truth. "Phoebe, there's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice low and urgent. "I'm not just a prisoner. I'm here on a mission to gather intelligence for the human resistance." Phoebe's movement faltered for a moment, but she didn't stop. I suspected as much," she admitted, her voice a mix of emotions. "Your behavior, your questions, it all makes sense now." They emerged into a dimly lit junction, pausing to catch their breath. John turned to face Phoebe, searching her violet eyes for any sign of betrayal. Instead, he saw conflict and a growing dedication. "The things I've learned here, the corruption I've witnessed." Phoebe shook her head, her scales shimmering in the low light. "It's not what I signed up for. John, I want to help you escape. It's the right thing to do." Relief washed over John, followed quickly by a surge of affection for the brave Jem'Hadar woman. He reached out, squeezing her hand gratefully. "Thank you, Phoebe. We're going to need each other to get out of this alive." As if to underscore his point, the sound of gunfire erupted from somewhere above them. John recognized the distinctive report of human weapons mixed with the high-pitched whine of Jem'Hadar plasma rifles. "The resistance," John muttered. "They must have launched a rescue operation." They pressed on through the maintenance tunnels, guided by Phoebe's knowledge of the facility's layout. As they moved, John filled her in on the details of his mission, and she shared what she knew of the Jem'Hadar command structure. After what felt like hours of crawling through the claustrophobic passages, they finally reached a secondary control room. John helped Phoebe out of the tunnel, both of them grimacing as they stretched their cramped muscles. As Phoebe moved to access a nearby console, a transmission crackled to life, filling the room with the gravelly voice of General Korax. "Attention, all personnel. The facility is to be locked down immediately. All human subjects are to be terminated. This is a direct order." Phoebe's scales paled, her eyes wide with shock. "By the stars," she whispered. "They're going to kill everyone." John's heart made, his mind racing. "We need to stop them. Phoebe, can you access the security systems from here?" She nodded, her fingers flying over the alien interface. "I can try to unlock some of the security doors. It might help your people advance." As Phoebe worked, John kept watch, his body tense and ready for action. Suddenly, the console beeped, and several indicator lights changed from red to green. "I've done it," Phoebe announced, "but it's triggered a facility-wide alert. We need to move, now." They slipped out of the control room, moving swiftly through the now unlocked corridors. The sound of combat grew louder, punctuated by the screams of the wounded and the harsh commands of Jem'Hadar officers. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a group of human prisoners being herded towards an execution chamber by Jem'Hadar guards. John's heart clenched at the sight of their terrified faces. He turned to Phoebe, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded, understanding instantly. "Follow my lead," she whispered. Phoebe straightened, adopting an authoritative posture as she approached the guards. "Halt," she commanded. "By order of Commander Zarek, these prisoners are to be relocated to the main hangar for emergency extraction." The guards hesitated, clearly confused by the conflicting orders. John seized the moment of uncertainty, launching into action. He disarmed the nearest guard with a swift series of moves, using the alien weapon to stun the others before they could react. As the guards crumpled to the ground, John turned to the stunned prisoners. "We're getting you out of here," he announced, "but we need to move fast." The group moved quickly through the facility, their numbers swelling as they freed more prisoners along the way. John led from the front, his combat skills and Phoebe's knowledge of the facility proving an effective combination. As they approached the main hangar, the sound of intense fighting grew louder. John recognized the voice of his second-in-command, Marcus, barking orders amid the chaos. "We're close," John told the group. "Once we link up with the resistance fighters, we'll have a real shot at escaping this place." But as they prepared to make their final push towards freedom, a new alarm blared throughout the facility. A computerized voice echoed through the corridors, its tone chillingly calm. "Warning, facility self-destruct sequence initiated. All personnel evacuate immediately. Detonation in 15 minutes. John and Phoebe exchanged a look of horror, both realizing the devastating implications of this new development. The countdown had begun, and with it, a race against time that would determine not only their fate, but that of countless others beyond the facility's walls. The fate of both their species hung in the balance, and their next move could determine the course of the future. John's mind raced, processing the dire situation. He turned to Phoebe, his eyes locking with hers. "We need to stop that self-destruct sequence," he said, his voice low and urgent. "But first, we need to blend in." Phoebe nodded, understanding immediately. She led John to a nearby storage locker, pulling out 2 high-ranking Jem'Hadar officer uniforms. They quickly donned the disguises, the unfamiliar weight of the alien armor settling on John's shoulders. "Remember, keep your head high and your movements confident," Phoebe instructed as she adjusted John's uniform. "Jem'Hadar officers never show hesitation." John nodded, squaring his shoulders and adopting a stern expression. With a deep breath, they stepped out into the corridor, now teeming with panicked personnel rushing to evacuate. Their ruse worked flawlessly. Lower-ranking Jem'Hadar saluted as they passed, while human prisoners cowered in fear. John felt a pang of guilt at their terrified expressions, but steeled himself, knowing that stopping the self-destruct was the only way to save them all. As they navigated through the chaos, distant explosions rocked the facility. John recognized the pattern. It was the resistance team, executing their diversion plan. The thought of his comrades risking their lives to rescue him filled John with a mix of pride and anxiety. They approached a security checkpoint where a group of agitated Jem'Hadar guards were debating whether to abandon their posts. John stepped forward, channeling every ounce of authority he could muster. "You will remain at your station," he barked, his voice hard and cold. "The evacuation is proceeding as planned. Return to your duties immediately." The guards snapped to attention, their earlier doubts forgotten in the face of a superior officer's command. As John and Phoebe passed through, he caught a glimpse of admiration in Phoebe's eyes. They were nearing General Corax's private quarters when a familiar voice stopped them in their tracks. "Halt! Identify yourselves!" John turned to see Lieutenant Kavanaugh striding towards them, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. John's heart raced, knowing that Kavanaugh, of all people, would be the most likely to see through their disguise. Phoebe stepped forward, her posture radiating confidence. "We are here on direct orders from Commander Zar-Ek," she stated, her voice crisp and authoritative. "We are to secure sensitive information from the General's quarters before the evacuation is complete." Kavanaugh's eyes darted between them, his scales rippling with scarcely controlled suspicion. "I was not informed of this," he said, his hand inching towards his weapon. John tensed, ready to spring into action if their cover was blown. But Phoebe remained calm, her quick thinking saving them once again. "The orders came through on a secure channel," she explained, producing a data pad from her uniform. "Security Protocol Omega-7. I assume you're familiar with it, Lieutenant?" Kavanaugh's eyes widened at the mention of the high-level protocol. He hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. "Of course, proceed, officers." As they entered Corax's quarters, John let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Quick thinking," he whispered to Phoebe. "Let's just hope we can find that override quickly," she responded, already moving to search the room. The General's quarters were opulent, filled with alien artifacts and advanced technology. John and Phoebe split up, frantically searching for anything that looked like it could control the facility's systems. As John rifled through a desk, he came across a data crystal. He activated it, and holographic files sprang to life before him. His blood ran cold as he scanned the contents. "Phoebe," he called, his voice hoarse, "you need to see this." She joined him, her eyes widening as she took in the information. The files detailed extensive plans for the subjugation of Earth, including mass enslavement and genetic experimentation on humans. It was far worse than either of them had imagined. "By the stars," Phoebe whispered, her scales paling. This isn't what I signed up for. This is genocide." Their eyes met, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever happened next, they were in this together. The moment was shattered by a piercing alarm. A computerized voice echoed through the room. "Alert! Imposters detected in General Corax's quarters. All units converge on location." "Kavnar," John growled. "He must have seen through our disguise." Phoebe darted to a control panel near the far wall. "Here! I think this is the override mechanism." John joined her, his fingers flying over the alien interface as he input the deactivation sequence. The facility trembled around them as Jem'Hadar forces pounded on the sealed doors. With seconds to spare, John entered the final command. The alarm ceased, and a new message played. Self-destruct sequence aborted. Relief washed over them, but it was short-lived. The doors began to glow red-hot as the Jem'Hadar used plasma cutters to break through. In the brief moment of respite, John turned to Phoebe. Their eyes met, and suddenly, the tension that had been building between them reached a breaking point. They came together in a fierce, desperate kiss, their bodies pressed close as if trying to memorize every detail of each other. As they broke apart, breathless, the reality of their situation came crashing back. The doors were beginning to give way, and they could hear Kavnar shouting orders on the other side. John's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route. His gaze fell on a small grate near the ceiling, a ventilation shaft. "There," he said, pointing. "It's our only chance." They scrambled to remove the grate, the sound of tearing metal behind them growing louder by the second. John boosted Phoebe up into the narrow opening, then pulled himself up just as the doors finally gave way. Kavnar's enraged face appeared in the room below, but John and Phoebe were already crawling through the tight space of the ventilation system, their bodies pressed close in the confined area. As they navigated the claustrophobic maze of ducts, John's mind raced. They had stopped the immediate threat, but the information they'd discovered was too important to leave behind. Somehow, they needed to get it to the resistance. The sound of combat grew louder as they approached a junction in the ventilation system. John peered through a grate and saw a fierce battle raging below between human resistance fighters and Jem'Hadar forces. "We need to join the fight," John said, already working to remove the grate. "But first, we need to find a way to transmit this data to the resistance. Any ideas?" Phoebe's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration. "The communication array," she said. "If we can reach it, we might be able to send a long-range transmission." John nodded, a plan already forming in his mind. "It's risky, but it might be our only shot." With willpower in their eyes, they prepared to drop down into the chaos below, ready to fight their way to the communication array and potentially change the course of the war. The battle ahead would be fierce, but with their newfound alliance and the strength they drew from each other, John and Phoebe were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The battle ahead would be fierce, but with their newfound alliance and the strength they drew from each other, John and Phoebe were ready to face whatever challenges lay before them. They dropped down from the ventilation shaft, landing in the midst of chaos. The air was thick with plasma fire and the acrid smell of burnt metal. John immediately took cover behind an overturned console, pulling Phoebe down beside him as a barrage of energy bolts sailed over their heads. "We need to reach the communication array," John shouted over the din of battle. "It's our only chance to transmit this data." Phoebe nodded, her eyes scanning the room. "It's on the other side of the facility. We'll have to fight our way through." John checked his weapon, a scavenged Jem'Hadar disruptor. "Then let's not waste any time." They moved as one, years of combat training and newfound trust allowing them to anticipate each other's movements. John provided covering fire as Phoebe darted from cover to cover, her agile form barely visible as she weaved through the battlefield. When she reached a defensible position, she returned the favor, allowing John to advance. As they pushed forward, the resistance of the Jem'Hadar forces intensified. John found himself engaged in close quarters combat with a towering Jem'Hadar soldier. The alien's strength was formidable, but John's human agility gave him an edge. He ducked under a powerful swing, using the Jem'Hadar's momentum against him to throw him off balance. A quick burst from his disruptor ended the fight. Phoebe, meanwhile, was using her insider knowledge to devastating effect. She called out weak points in the Jem'Hadar defenses, allowing John to target them with precision. Her familiarity with the facility's layout proved invaluable as she guided them through less defended areas. As they neared a junction, a familiar voice called out, "John, over here!" John turned to see Marcus crouched behind a makeshift barricade, surrounded by a small group of human resistance fighters. Relief washed over him at the sight of his second-in-command. "Marcus, am I glad to see you," John said as he and Phoebe took cover with the group. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he noticed Phoebe. "Who's this?" he asked, his tone infused with suspicion. "She's with me," John said firmly. "Her name is Phoebe, and we wouldn't have made it this far without her." Marcus looked unconvinced, but John met his gaze steadily. "Trust me, Marcus, she's risked everything to help us." After a moment of tense silence, Marcus nodded. "All right, what's the plan?" John quickly outlined their need to reach the communication array. "We have critical data that needs to be transmitted to the resistance. It could change the course of the war." Marcus considered this. "We've managed to secure a temporary stronghold in a nearby storage area. We can use that as a base to plan our next move." The group made their way to the storage area, using the cover of battle to slip past Jem'Hadar patrols. Once inside, they barricaded the doors and gathered around a holographic display of the facility. "The communication array is here," Phoebe said, pointing to a location on the far side of the complex. "But it's heavily guarded. We'll need a diversion to have any chance of reaching it." Marcus nodded. "My team can provide that. We'll create enough noise to draw away the bulk of their forces." "It's risky," John said, looking at his old friend. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus grinned, a fierce light in his eyes. "Since when have we ever played it safe?" As they finalized their plan, a tremor shook the facility. The sound of distant explosions grew louder. "What was that?" one of the resistance fighters asked. Phoebe's face paled. "They've deployed the prototype weapons. General Korax must have arrived." "Prototype weapons?" John asked. "Highly unstable energy weapons," Phoebe explained. "They were deemed too dangerous for regular use, but if Korax is here, he must be desperate." John's teeth gritted in dedication. "Then we don't have much time. Marcus, get your team ready. Phoebe and I will make our move as soon as we hear your diversion." As Marcus's team prepared to move out, John pulled Phoebe aside. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly. Phoebe met his gaze, her alien eyes filled with a mix of fear and persistence. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." John nodded, squeezing her hand briefly before turning to address the group. "All right, everyone. You know your roles. Let's move out." As Marcus and his team left to set up their diversion, John and Phoebe prepared for their assault on the communication array. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, and they were the only ones who could tip the scales. With a final shared look of understanding, they stepped out into the chaotic corridors of the facility, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The seconds ticked by as John and Phoebe raced through the corridors, their footsteps echoing off the metal walls. The sounds of battle grew louder as they approached the communication array. As they rounded the final corner, they were met with a scene of chaos. The large room housing the array was filled with smoke and debris, the air crackling with energy from stray weapons fire. Jem'Hadar soldiers were engaged in fierce combat with human resistance fighters, their bodies illuminated by the flashes of disruptor blasts. John spotted the central console of the communication array across the room. "There!" he shouted to Phoebe over the din of battle. "We need to reach that terminal." They dashed forward, ducking and weaving through the melee. John provided covering fire as Phoebe sprinted ahead, her lithe form darting between combatants. They were mere meters away from their goal when a booming voice cut through the chaos. "Stop them!" General Korax's commanding tone rang out as he strode into the room, flanked by his elite guard. The towering Jem'Hadar leader's eyes locked onto John and Phoebe, burning with fury. John turned to Phoebe. "Get to the console. I'll hold them off." As Phoebe reached the terminal and began the data transfer, John engaged the approaching Jem'Hadar forces. His disruptor sang as he fired, taking down 2 soldiers in quick succession. But Korax and his guard pressed forward, their superior numbers threatening to overwhelm him. The facility shuddered violently, nearly throwing John off his feet. He watched in horror as Korax raised a weapon unlike any he'd seen before, sleek, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. "The prototype," Phoebe gasped, her fingers flying over the console as she worked to complete the transmission. Korax fired the weapon, and a blast of pure energy tore through the room, vaporizing a nearby console and sending shrapnel flying in all directions. John dove for cover, feeling the heat of the explosion singe his skin. As he scrambled to his feet, John saw Phoebe's eyes widen. In that moment, something changed in her. Her body tensed, her movements becoming more fluid and precise. With a burst of speed that seemed impossible, she launched herself at Korax. The Jem'Hadar general, caught off guard by Phoebe's sudden attack, stumbled backward. His prototype weapon went flying, clattering across the floor. John seized the opportunity, diving into the fray to engage Korax's guards. The battle became a brutal dance of hand-to-hand combat. John and Phoebe moved in perfect synchronization, their recent trials having forged an unspoken bond. They anticipated each other's moves, covering weaknesses and exploiting openings in the Jem'Hadar defenses. Suddenly the room lurched. Gravity plating failed in sections, creating pockets of zero gravity throughout the chamber. John found himself floating momentarily before crashing back to the floor in an area where gravity still functioned. The Jem'Hadar soldiers flailed in the unfamiliar conditions, their movements becoming erratic and uncoordinated. John and Phoebe, however, adapted quickly. They used the shifting gravity to their advantage, pushing off walls and ceilings to outmaneuver their opponents. In one gravity-free section, John grappled with a Jem'Hadar soldier, using the alien's own momentum to send him spinning helplessly into the void. The prototype weapons continued to wreak havoc, each blast causing more damage to the facility's systems. Warning klaxons blared, their shrill cries adding to the cacophony of battle. Through it all, John could see the progress bar on the communication console slowly filling. The transmission was nearly complete. Just as victory seemed within reach, the doors to the chamber burst open. Lieutenant Kavanaugh stormed in, leading a fresh wave of Jem'Hadar reinforcements. John's heart sank as he realized Marcus and his team must have been defeated. "We're outnumbered," he shouted to Phoebe, his back pressed against a fallen beam as disruptor fire rained around them. But fate, it seemed, had one more surprise in store. From another entrance, a group of humans poured into the room. They were armed with makeshift weapons, pipes, sharpened metal, and even a few scavenged Jem'Hadar disruptors. At their lead was a woman with fierce dedication in her eyes. "Sarah!" one of the resistance fighters called out in recognition. The newly freed prisoners joined the fray, turning the tide of battle once more. John watched in awe as Sarah, wielding a length of pipe with deadly precision, took down a Jem'Hadar soldier with a well-placed strike. The battle raged on, the room filled with the sounds of combat and the acrid smell of ozone from the prototype weapons. John found himself locked in combat with General Korax, their fight a brutal test of strength and skill. As they grappled, John noticed something through a gaping hole in the wall, the facility's main power core, exposed by the damage from the prototype weapons. An idea formed in his mind, an audacious attempt that might be their only chance. "Phoebe! Sarah!" he called out, dodging a vicious blow from Korax. "The power core! We need to overload it." Phoebe's eyes lit up with understanding. She quickly relayed the plan to Sarah, and the two women fought their way towards the exposed core. John redoubled his efforts against Korax, knowing he needed to buy them time. The Jem'Hadar general was a formidable opponent, his genetically enhanced strength pushing John to his limits. But John's human adaptability and quick thinking kept him in the fight. As Phoebe and Sarah worked feverishly to overload the power core, John could see the strain on Phoebe's face. She was pushing her newfound abilities to their limit, her body trembling with the effort of containing and directing the building energy. The facility groaned around them, systems failing as the battle raged on. John knew they were running out of time. He ducked under a swing from Korax, using the Jem'Hadar's momentum against him to throw him off balance. Just as it seemed the Jem'Hadar might overwhelm them, A blinding flash of light erupted from the power core. An electromagnetic pulse swept through the room, and for a moment, everything went silent. As the light faded, John saw the Jem'Hadar weapons go dark. The pulse had worked, disabling their technology and giving the humans the advantage they desperately needed. But the victory came at a cost. The facility's life support systems began to fail, and a new countdown began, one that would end with the total collapse of their environment. John rushed to Phoebe's side, finding her weakened but alive after her ordeal with the power core. As he helped her to her feet, their eyes met, and a wordless understanding passed between them. They had survived this battle, but their greatest challenge still lay ahead. With the facility crumbling around them and life support failing, John, Phoebe, and the freed humans faced a new, desperate race against time. As alarms blared and systems shut down one by one, they knew their next moves would determine not just their own fate, but potentially the course of the entire conflict between humans and Jem'Hadar. Jem'Hadar and humans alike. As the dust settled, the gravity of their situation became painfully clear. The facility's life support systems were failing rapidly, and the structural integrity was compromised beyond repair. Alarms blared incessantly, their urgent wails punctuated by the groans of twisting metal and shattering glass. John helped Phoebe to her feet, his eyes scanning the room for any means of escape. "We need to move, now!" he shouted over the cacophony of alarms and crumbling infrastructure. Sarah, her face streaked with grime and drive, rallied the freed humans. "This way," she called, gesturing towards a corridor that seemed relatively intact. "I saw a hangar bay when they brought us in." The group surged forward, John and Phoebe bringing up the rear. They navigated treacherous hallways, ducking under fallen beams and leaping over widening fissures in the floor. The air grew thin and acrid, filled with smoke and the scent of burning circuitry. As they rounded a corner, the hangar bay came into view. Hope surged through the group at the sight of a single operational shuttle, its sleek form a stark contrast to the destruction surrounding it. "Get everyone on board," John ordered, his voice hoarse from the toxic air. Sarah herded the freed humans into the shuttle, while John and Phoebe assessed the situation. The harsh reality hit them like a physical blow. The shuttle wasn't large enough to accommodate everyone. John's face hardened as he made the impossible decision. "I'll stay behind," he said, his eyes meeting Phoebe's. "Make sure everyone else gets out safely." Phoebe's alien features contorted with emotion. "No," she said firmly, her hand gripping his arm. "I won't leave you." As the others prepared the shuttle for launch, John and Phoebe scanned the hangar bay for alternatives. Amid the wreckage, a glint of metal caught John's eye. He moved closer, pushing aside debris to reveal a familiar shape. "Phoebe," he called, excitement creeping into his voice despite the dire circumstances. "Look at this." She rushed to his side, her eyes widening as she recognized the device. "A Jem'Hadar teleportation prototype," she breathed. "But it's damaged." John's mind raced. "Can we fix it?" Phoebe's fingers danced over the device's surface, her enhanced intellect processing the possibilities. "Maybe," she said, "but it's risky. We'd be gambling with our lives." John glanced at the shuttle, where Sarah was helping the last of the humans board. He turned back to Phoebe, a wry smile on his face. "What choice do we have?" With a nod of agreement, they set to work. John called out to Sarah, explaining their plan. "Get everyone to safety," he instructed. "We'll find our own way out." Sarah hesitated, but the urgency of their situation left no room for argument. "Good luck," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The shuttle's engines roared to life, and within moments, it had disappeared into the smoke-filled sky. John and Phoebe worked feverishly, their hands moving in perfect synchronization as they repaired the teleportation device. The facility continued to crumble around them, entire sections collapsing with thunderous crashes. They dodged falling debris, navigating increasingly unstable corridors in search of components. In a partially collapsed laboratory, John reached for a crucial power cell, only to find Phoebe's hand already there. Their fingers intertwined for a moment, a spark of electricity passing between them that had nothing to do with the failing systems around them. As they worked, stolen glances and lingering touches spoke volumes. The imminent danger amplified every sensation, every emotion. John found himself mesmerized by the grace of Phoebe's movements, the persistence in her alien eyes. For her part, Phoebe marveled at John's resourcefulness, his unwavering courage in the face of certain death. With a final, heart-stopping crash, the far end of the hangar bay collapsed entirely. The teleportation device hummed to life, its lights flickering uncertainly. "It's now or never," John said, reaching for Phoebe's hand. She took it without hesitation, her fingers interlacing with his. "Together," she affirmed. John activated the device just as the floor beneath their feet gave way. He pulled Phoebe close, their bodies pressed together as they fell. A brilliant flash of light enveloped them, and the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of color and sensation. For a timeless moment, they existed in a state of pure energy, their very atoms intermingled. Then, with a disorienting lurch, reality reasserted itself. They materialized in a forest clearing, the sudden silence deafening after the chaos they'd left behind. John and Phoebe clung to each other, gasping for breath, their bodies trembling with residual adrenaline and the after-effects of the teleportation. As the initial shock wore off, they became acutely aware of their intimate proximity. John's arms were still wrapped tightly around Phoebe, her face buried in the crook of his neck. They pulled back slightly, their eyes meeting. In that moment, all the unspoken feelings that had been building between them came rushing to the surface. Without a word, John cupped Phoebe's face in his hands and kissed her deeply. She responded with equal passion, her fingers tangling in his hair as she pulled him closer. The kiss was a revelation, a perfect fusion of tenderness and intensity. When they finally parted, both were breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. "I thought we were going to die," John murmured, his thumb tracing the curve of Phoebe's cheek. She smiled, her alien features softening with affection. "I'm glad we didn't," she replied softly. Their moment of bliss was interrupted by the distant sound of engines. They looked up to see the shuttle descending into the clearing, its arrival kicking up a swirl of leaves and debris. As the hatch opened and their companions poured out, John and Phoebe shared one last private smile before turning to greet their friends. The joyful reunions that followed were a cacophony of laughter, tears, and excited chatter. Sarah embraced them both, her relief palpable. "I can't believe you made it," she said, her voice choked with emotion. John squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "We had a little help from Gem Hatter technology," he explained, gesturing to the battered teleportation device they'd brought with them. As the group's excitement settled into a more subdued relief, John's mind turned to their next steps. He reached for the Gem Hadar communication device they'd salvaged, his fingers moving deftly over its controls. "Time to let the Resistance know what we've accomplished," he said, meeting Phoebe's gaze. She nodded, understanding the weight of the moment. As John began transmitting their hard-won intelligence, Phoebe looked out over the group of freed humans. She saw hope in their eyes, a spark that had been absent during their captivity. It was a powerful reminder of why they had fought so hard, why they had risked everything. The forest around them was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in vibrant hues, Phoebe felt a sense of possibility wash over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew that with John by her side and with the strength of both humans and Gem Hadar who sought peace, they had a fighting chance to create a better future. John finished his transmission and moved to stand beside her. Without a word, he took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. Together, they faced the horizon, ready to take on whatever came next.
If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video. Then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.